go ahead.
Hello, I'm Tom Campbell, and this is Your Superior Self.
Tom, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the show. This really is a treat. I'm excited to get into consciousness with you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Trey. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Luckily enough, I was able to connect with Marla Freeze, and she got me in touch with your people. And I really do appreciate, it's funny how I look back and I think about the idiosyncrasies of the world and how things work out. And it's just crazy that not too long after I completed the Monroe books, here I am speaking with you. It's pretty exciting for me anyway.
Well, you completed all three of Bob's books?
All three. I actually did it over, I listened to Audible, and I just started researching your stuff. So you're the author of My Big Toe trilogy. So that's my next, my next stop is to start reading your stuff a little bit more.
Well, you'll find mine to be a lot different than Bob Monroe's. Yeah.
Oh, how different? Like what different? Like, I mean,
well, Bob Monroe, of course, as you know, he had out of bodies, didn't want to have them, but he just had them. And he kept track of his out of body experiences in a journal. And his books are basically that journal. It's just an account of his experiences. Bob, at the time, of course, Bob wrote those, early 70s, late 60s. The first one was probably late 60s. The last one was probably closer to middle 70s. But in any case, when he wrote those, he was of the mind that what he saw was exactly what was there, that his experiences defined another space, another place where things existed just like things exist here in this space and place called the physical universe. So that was his mindset, and he was very good at being a reporter, not adding anything to it, which sounds easy, but it's really not easy. When you get information, particularly information that's unusual, it's hard to put that into language, then put that into writing and actually capture it, without adding your own twist and your own color and your own whatever to it. So Bob was good at saying, here's what happened, here's what I saw, here's what I said, this is what they said. And he was very good at that. Now, my book is entirely different. My book is, my three books. Bob wrote three. I really have three too. The My Big Toe is a trilogy. And my books are not about my experience. My books are a toe, theory of everything. What happened is that after I spent 15 to 20 hours a week with Bob Monroe over, half a decade or more, I took the next 30, 35 years to try to figure out, how did all this work? Why did it work? Why did it have to be the way it was? What was the logic behind it? What other things could one do with one's consciousness? And what did out of body mean? Just where was that? And how real was it? And, why do some people like Bob and myself and others can do it on demand, and most other people, it just happens when it happens. It's not a thing that's easy for most people to control. So I wanted to answer all of those questions. Also, all the things like, how does one heal with their mind? How does one remote view? How does one get data out of this intuitive space we call the larger system, the source? So I spent a lot of time doing research in the out-of-body space, which means, say, just for an example, remote viewing and then changing a variable and seeing what difference that makes in my result, and then changing another variable, and doing that until I had some good idea what variables made a difference and why. So that took a long time, changing one variable at a time and then doing 50 or 60 or 100 repetitions to see how that works, because every experience is a little unique. So you have to do a lot of them to get a sense of what's changing.
Mm.
So when I was done, I wrote this trilogy mostly as a theory of consciousness. How did consciousness work? What was consciousness? And I had established a set of facts about consciousness. These are the facts of consciousness. I'm a physicist, so I had already a set of facts about the physical world. That's physics. And I started looking for one theory, one understanding that would explain all of them. And I was very certain that there was such an explanation or such an idea that would explain all of those facts, both in the consciousness and in the physics, because one of the facts of consciousness that I found early on was that consciousness is fundamental. It's more fundamental than the physical reality. And I came to that conclusion because I could easily do things within consciousness that would affect things in the physical world. But it doesn't work the other way. I couldn't do things in the physical world that change things in consciousness in the same way. So that tells me that the arrow of causality is from consciousness to the physical world, that consciousness is the superset and that the physical world is the subset. So I knew that if I understood consciousness well enough, I should be able to derive physics and those parts of physics that are unknown now, like quantum mechanics. Why should particles be described as probability distributions? Or relativity? Why should the speed of light be a constant? Or where did that ball of plasma come from in the Big Bang before our universe even existed? It obviously didn't come from our universe. It came from someplace else. So there's lots of these, dozens and dozens of these unknowns. Things we know in physics are true because our experiments say they are. Our theory points to them as being true, but we just have no idea why they're true. We call these paradoxes. And I was able to not only explain quantum physics and relativity, derive them from first principles, which physicists now can't do. They start with an assumption. Relativity is based on the assumption that speed of light's constant. And I can derive why that has to be. And same with quantum mechanics. I can derive why, particles are probability distributions, not really particles. So I got some experiments now going on. Published a paper in a physics journal that explained my theory. It was accepted, peer-reviewed, published. And now I'm doing those experiments, some experiments to lend credibility and evidence to the fact that, one, this is a virtual reality, and two, that consciousness is the computer. So that's kind of a very short summary of who I am and where I came from and how I ended up, what's a nice physicist like me doing in a place like this?
Well, your background is insane, my man. Like you've got what, 2 undergrads and mathematics. I think one is one, right?
Yeah.
Mathematics and physics.
Yeah.
And then you were trying to get, you were going to get your doctorate. You just happened to leave before you could get it. Why was that? Like, why'd you end up leaving before you could get it?
Well, at the time, I can tell you the way I felt, and then I kind of thought about it years later and understand there was more to it. At the time, I already had a master's degree, working on the PhD. Typically, what one does is does some research that is new, original research, gets it published in a journal, in a peer-reviewed journal, and that gets you your PhD. That's the key idea. Well, I did that. I did research in experimental nuclear physics. I wrote it up. It was actually found something new in a nuclear resonance in a sodium-21 nucleus, and wrote it all up to publish. And my major professor said, "Oh, that's good. Let's do another one."
That's that easy. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's do another one. It'll only take you about a year. We'll change targets and we can do another one. And at the time, I was burnt out. I'd been a student since I started kindergarten at 5 years old, and now I was in my late 20s, and I was still a student, because getting a PhD in physics is not a 4-year process. It's more like a 7-year process. It takes longer. It's the research. It's not something you do quickly in
Sure.
physics. It's very complicated research, and it takes a long time. So I was done, and I felt like I was being abused, like all graduate students really are, because they work for peanuts, and they're very highly technical people that work for very little money. So I just said, no, not going to do that. I'm gone. So I just left, and I got a job, which was rather miraculous, because right at that time we were in a economic slump, and there just weren't jobs. It was really, really hard to get a job, because industry was decreasing and laying off, not hiring. So it was hard. But this job just came up, and before it ever got announced, I heard about it, made a connection, got a job, right, bolt of blue, right out of the sky. So I took this job, and within a couple of months, my boss at that job introduced me to Bob Monroe's first book, and asked me to read it, tell me what he thought. So I did, and I said, well, if he's making this up, then, well, it's a nice story. But if it's real, if he's not just trying to sell books, then wow, this really shows that there's another piece of reality that's unknown. Well, I'm a physicist, and what we do is model reality. That's the job. So it was about a month after that we found out that Bob Monroe lived not that far away from where we worked. So a bunch of us got together and went out to meet him. And sure enough, my idea was, is this guy a faker? Is he making this stuff up to sell books, or what? Well, you drive up to his house at that time, and it was this country mansion on a hill, whiteboard fences, I don't know, I think he had like 100 acres, horses running in the field along the fence, following the cars, a lake. It was obviously somebody who didn't need, to sell books to make money. He, particularly a genre like Out of Body, he's not going to make a lot of money. That's not a subject that's on everybody's wish list. So obviously he didn't write that to make money. It wasn't about selling books. And then when I talked to him, he was a very rational, very level, very solid kind of guy. And he was just built a lab, didn't know what to do with it. He wanted to study consciousness, to make it real, to make it not just a crazy old guy that had these things happen to him, but he wanted to understand it. So he had money. He had lots of money to do that. So he built a lab, and he was looking for people, and I got an offer to work with him. And that's when I started working with Bob Monroe. Now, none of that would have happened had I said, all right, I'm going to just go on with my degree, one more year, plug and jug, and out will come another paper, and then you'll let me out, right? And so
I say you made a pretty good decision.
So my whole life changed. Everything in my life took a different change after that. And that job I got was just a flash that, like a friend told a friend told a friend kind of thing that I got, that if I hadn't been at just the right place, just the right time, that would never have happened. I wouldn't have made that connection. I wouldn't have run into Journeys Out of the Body, probably a book I never would have picked up. So that
awesome.
made all the difference. And then I look back at it and I say, that was not like me. I'm a very laid back kind of guy. And the fact that they were going to hold me up for another year, I would have shrugged my shoulders and said, yeah, okay, if that's the price I got to pay, what's another year? That would be more typical Tom Campbell. But for some reason, I just couldn't do that. I had to go. I just had this drive, this push. I needed to go. There was something else I needed to do, Time's wasting. I have to get on the train, the train's ready to leave. So I had that sense, but didn't know why. And now I know why. That was the system nudging me to make this connection so that I would end up connected to Bob Monroe through this job, and that's why I got that particular job and with that particular boss, and all the rest of it worked. So now
The
sometimes
system
the
is
system
nudging
gives
you.
us nudges, and that was, looking back on it now, it's obvious why I suddenly was so burnt out, when that's really not my character to be
Yeah.
burnt out. I just kind of keep on trudging.
Keep going, laid
Yeah,
back.
that's what I do. So in any case, now I look back at it and I said, all right, it was time for me to make this connection. And the system misjudged the professor and his choice to kind of hold me up for another year.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
anyway, that's why I didn't get the PhD. So I
Well, that's
did
a
the
pretty good
work.
reason.
I did the work. I passed all the tests. I took the qualifiers. I passed them on my first try, and all of that was done. All the coursework was done. It was just the thesis, and I just left short after finishing one thesis and needed to do another one to get out.
Yeah, that is a lot of work, a lot of research. I'm researching right now. I want to go. I'm going back to school. I want to get my goal to myself. My gift to myself is to get a PhD in psychology, whether that's counseling or something in that. Maybe I've been looking at transpersonal psychology as well, and but I'm just enjoying the expansion of knowledge, right? Like I'm loving the journey. Like getting the same type of feeling that you got, like, right, the source nudging me in that direction, and I'm just following the
Mm-hmm.
vibration, like the fire in my belly when I research something. Like, I cannot wait to go to psychology class and read about theories and hypotheses and data collection and statistics. And I mean, it's not physics, but it's very interesting to me. Physics is tough though. Like, I'm just learning about the quantum physics and the quantum mechanics, not like in depth like your level, but like the basics of that, right? I've read some Dr. Joe Dispenza lately, and reading some of his thoughts on. He doesn't have a peer review article, I don't think, but he does have a couple books out talking about like the self-healing technique of being able to go in and meditate and allowing yourself to get out into the field. And he says he has a lot of data collected, that it has data to support the idea that we can heal ourselves.
Sure.
And you were talking about that earlier, but you said something earlier that caught my attention. It was like you can manipulate not manipulate, but the consciousness can manipulate the physical, right?
Sure.
Can you give me an example of that?
Oh, well, there's multiple ways that happens. Well, that you just mentioned, healing. You can heal yourself.
Mhm.
You can heal other people. You can modify, there's a thing called the placebo effect that says if you tell somebody that they're going to get well, you're going to give them a wonderful medicine, and they get very positive, then they have like 35% of the people, all they need to heal is to be positive. And it's not that then they just think they're better, but they really get better against a control group that everything else was exactly the same, except they didn't get the positive message. And there's about a 35% increase of healing, over the control group. And that's way statistically significant.
Sure.
So the placebo effect is a real thing. Well, that's something where consciousness affects the physical reality. Um, when you do remote viewing, you're picking up information on the physical reality. You can pick up information on the state of someone's health, or the state of someone's spiritual quality, or what happened in the past. There's all sorts of information out there that is accessible. And of course, I wanted to know, well, where does that information come from, and why is it there? Why does that information have to be there? What's its purpose? What's its point? And I solved that problem too. It has to be there because of the requirements of the rendering engine that creates this virtual reality. It's data that rendering engine needs to use.
Hmm.
So that's why it gets there. And it needs to be there in the probable future. But then as time goes by, that same data just becomes the past probabilities.
Wow, that I've never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so when you met Robert Monroe, were you like, you didn't have out of body experiences prior to that, right?
Well, I did, but a long way prior to that. I
Really?
had out of body experiences when I was 5, 6, 7, and learned to go out of body
Really?
on my own. I was taught. I ran into some entities who got me out of body, and then proceeded to teach me. And that's in the first part of the first book. I do a little history of myself,
Sure.
and so I did that. But by the time I was 7 or so, that door was shut. And I didn't have any out of bodies, and I kind of forgot about it. It was just a thing that happened. So it wasn't that remarkable. It was just, a thing to happen because you don't have much idea of how you are different compared to other people. So I hadn't thought about it at all for many, many years, although I was always able to just ask questions, but I didn't think really to who or to what. I just pose a question and get answers. That I could always do that. And anyway, when I got with Bob in like 1971, very early 70s, 72, about a year or two into that relationship with Bob, Bob told me about one of the out of bodies that he had had the previous night. Like I said, I spent a lot of time with Bob, like I said, 15 to 20 hours a week. So we had just a lot of conversations, and he was talking about an out of body he had. It was like a test. He was asked to answer this test question, and then if he got that right, he'd get another one. If he got that right, he'd get another one. And he was going through this series of tests that he got. And when he told me the first one, it kind of rang a bell because that was familiar to me. And then the second one rang the bell even louder. And I realized that I had done that when I was between 5 and 7, sometime in that time, I had taken that same test. So I stopped him and I said, okay, now this was the answer you got for the second one, right? And he said, right. And I said, well, here's the third one. And I told him the third one, and his jaw dropped because that was exactly what his third one was. And I told him, well, when I took that, that's the answer I got. And he said, that's what he got too. So then we went on to the fourth one, and I told him what that was. And it seems that on the fifth one was the last one we both took, and we both had the same answer. So whether they were right or wrong, whether that was right in the end of the sequence, or whether it was wrong, and that's where we got stopped, neither one of us really knew.
Yeah.
But at that point, everything started to come back to me. I started to remember all of that stuff that was going on when I was very young. And over the next probably 6 months or so, all those memories poured back in. And so I can't say that I had never done that before, but I hadn't done it for a long, long time. But it wasn't that hard to pick it back up again.
Sure.
Once Bob was teaching me.
Wow, man, I can only imagine what that conversation was like. So this test, is this something that you were talking about, the questions and answers? Is this something that they administered to people at the institute? Like, what test are you talking about?
No, this is a test administered by in non-physical space altogether. This is
Really?
not a physical test. This is a test that happens when you're out of body, when you're not in your body. You're out
So that you
interacting,
get a test when you're
and
out of your body?
you get tests sometimes. Yes, you get
Like,
tests, and
can you
the
give me an
reason.
example of a question?
Sure. Well, in this particular test, the first question was almost silly, and that was something like, "Would you rather, have this chest of money, lots of money, or learn something new?" And the right answer is learn something new.
Yeah.
Obvious, it was a test to see where you were as far as in your evolutionary process. How much ego, how much fear, how much belief, was controlling your choices. And they were given, and they're routinely given to people when they go out of body, just to get the system has some idea of where they are and what it is they need to learn, what is going to frighten them. Because if they have too much fear, the out of body is going to turn out to be a bad experience. They're going to run into that fear out there, and it won't be so pleasant, and they'll end up being worse off than they were before they went. So the system wants to know who should it encourage and who should it discourage as far as the out of body goes, and what kind of things should it give them afterwards. That out of body experience, the best model to kind of explain it is that it's like a single player virtual reality game, and the system is playing all the characters that are in it, and you are playing yourself, and you're interacting with all those characters, and there's things for you to learn. There's things for you to experience and do, choices to make. So that's probably the best description of what an out-of-body experience is. You get a different data stream than you do that defines this physical universe reality. That's a data stream. It's a virtual reality. Out-of-body is a different virtual reality, different data stream. And mostly it's a single player game. It doesn't have to just be a single player game. Myself and the friend who also worked the same place I did went out to meet Bob the same time I did, and also worked with me. We went out of body together once. So then it was a double player. It was 2 players in that game because we interacted. We talked with each other. We connected, and all of that was being recorded from each of us. We were in isolation booths, acoustically isolated, and I was electromagnetically isolated as well. And we each had microphones, and we're describing what it is we were doing, what we were saying, what was going on, and independently. So we were making 2 cassette tapes. You can know how old that is when I say cassette tapes. So we were each doing cassette tapes. And at the end, we get out of our booths and we come up to the control room where Bob was, and he played both the tapes for us, started them at the same time so they would be coordinated and they would be synced in time. And there was Dennis and I asking and answering each other's questions, asking questions, getting answers, talking. Oh, do you see that thing over there? You mean that thing? Yes. And over to the right of that thing, do you see that round bulbous thing? Oh yeah, I see that. Let's go explore. So we were obviously interacting and we're together. So that was not a single player game, but at least a 2-player game.
And you talk about the boots, right? Like, so the method that you guys were utilizing, that's the Hemi-Sync, right? Like allowing the 2 hemispheres of the brain to, I don't really understand it, but you're using sound waves, right, to get into different states of consciousness.
Yeah, it's a thing called binaural beats. And actually it was Dennis who first saw that. He found binaural beats talked about in an article in Scientific American that was back in the late 60s. And at the time, we were going out to the lab just trying to somehow isolate some of these paranormal things so that we could discover what made them work, and how they worked. So he came to me at work and he said, hey, look at these binaural beats. What they say here is they entrain brainwaves. In other words, you play a pure tone in this ear and another pure tone in that ear, but the 2 tones are a little different. And what you hear is a frequency that's the difference frequency. So I have 100 hertz, 104 hertz. I'll hear a 4 hertz. 4 hertz means 4 times a second, like bum, 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 bum. That's like 4 bumps a second. And I'll hear a tone like that inside my head. Well, it's because one tone goes into the right hemisphere, the other one goes to the left hemisphere. Those 2 signals cross at the corpus callosum, which is the membrane between the hemispheres, and actually mixes there. And when it does that, it tends to push you into an EEG state. It's an encephalogram. It's where the electrodes are on your head and it measures the electromagnetic energy around your head that is dominant. Your energy in that EEG is the same as the difference frequency. So you raise the difference frequency up and you'll see the EEG starts, the energy goes up to a higher frequency. So that's what's called brainwave entrainment. The difference frequency would tend to push a person into a particular brainwave state. So we wanted to be at around 4 hertz, a theta state. Theta state is that region just before you lose consciousness. Delta, the next one down, which is around 2 hertz, is unconscious. That's your deep sleep. Theta is one that you're right on the edge. You're about to fall off into delta. If you go up, the next one up in frequency is alpha. And alpha is like 8, 10, somewhere in there. And that's where you're very mellow. You know, you're very relaxed and but not sleeping. Theta then is on the border between awake and sleeping, and delta is asleep. So we wanted to be right at that theta state. The reason we wanted to be there was, one, people who were very good meditators, like monks who've been meditating for the last 30 years, they tended to have all of their EEG energy focused on around 4 hertz. And Bob Monroe got a pulsation state that was 4 hertz just as he went out of body, just before he went out of body. So we made an assumption, put those two things together, and went to the lab and started making binaural beat tapes and playing them. And actually, Bob was out of town. He was doing a program at Esalen in Big Sur, California at that time. And when he came back, we had about 2 weeks worth of work where we had optimized the binaural beats, you know, like what bass frequency and how long and exactly what was the difference frequency. And we'd been playing with it for a couple of weeks to optimize it. So that's where Hemi-Sync really came from. Bob had sounds before that, but they were not as effective. They were good sounds. They were relaxing sounds, sort of surfy. Didn't sound exactly like surf, but kind of had it was a pink noise that was oscillators, had a basic 4 hertz beat because Bob had that 4 hertz vibration and he put that together too. So then we added the binaural beat to that, and suddenly it became a lot more potent as far as people having that experience, out of body experience. So that's where it came from. So yes, we were in separate booths. There were 3 booths, a control room, and then 3 booths. And these 3 booths were all acoustically isolated. So you could shout in one of them, and all you'd hear outside the door or in the next room is a little muffled rumble. You really couldn't make anything out. And if you were just talking in a normal voice, you didn't hear anything at all.
Yeah.
And I always was in booth 1, and booth 2 was empty, and the next booth down was 3, and that's where Dennis was. So we basically had 2 booths worth of isolation acoustically between us. And then we had this microphone hanging on 2 strings down from the ceiling that was about an inch above our lips. And as we experienced things, we would tell Bob what we were experiencing. Now, that's not typical for people doing out of body, that they're talking at the same time, because talking is a physical thing.
Yeah.
But Bob taught us to do that. And with practice, you can do that without much difficulty. It just takes practice to get used to it, because otherwise he couldn't coach us if he didn't know what we were experiencing. Sure. And to coach us after the fact wasn't nearly as effective as coaching us while we were there. So that's how we worked. So we'd go in and lay down on these water beds, a single bed, and have this microphone right above our lips and turn out the lights, and we'd have a headset on, and Bob would be in the control room, and he'd turn on a tape machine to record everything that we did. So what he said was recorded, and what I said and Dennis said were all recorded on 3 different tracks. We had a 8-track. That's another thing that goes back a little bit. We had 8-track recorder. We had a big reel-to-reel 4-track recorder, and that was the setup. So that's how we basically worked.
That is just so amazing. I bet you could probably produce some pretty amazing sounds now with the technology that you guys have.
Yeah, I do. Matter of fact, if anybody's interested in those sounds, you can go to MBT Events, www.mbtevents.com. And there's a whole set of sounds that I have. It's, I think, 14 different binaural beat tapes. I think it cost about $20 or something like
I'm
that.
definitely getting something. Can you
And
download them straight to your phone?
yeah, you can download them to a phone or any place that you want. And
Yeah.
those are the ones that I use in a course that I give called an immersive course. It's like a 4-day course or something that we work on. And I teach people how to get in touch with the larger conscious system, how to communicate telepathically with other consciousness. That other consciousness could be dead or alive or a dog or a cat, just something that's conscious. How do you communicate conscious to conscious and telepathically? And I teach getting data out of the databases, remote viewing, healing, and finally just exploring.
Yeah.
So that's a course, and I've generated these binaural beats to help the people that are in that course, but anybody can get them, and
Have you ever had a
pretty
deep
cheap.
conversation with someone who's had a near-death experience and kind of compared notes about your out of body and their near death, and are
Oh, sure.
any similarities in the two? Because I feel like with your and Bob's um, research and data that you've collected, it seems like you guys can do whatever you want, like go anywhere that you want. And when I've read Dr. Eben Alexander's account of his
Mhm.
near-death experience, and it seems like they're two different stories. Can you touch on that a little bit? Like, what
Yeah,
is your experience with that?
they're not. Well, they are two different stories, but it's mostly because the near-death experience is a limited experience, but they're really pretty much the same thing at the fundamental level, at the basic level. What happens is that they let go of the data stream here, okay, which is easy because they're on drugs. They've been put out, with pain medications and other things. They've had anesthesia. So letting go of this data stream is very simple at that point. Then they get a data stream that starts to define another reality. And in this other reality, well, it depends. If you look at the whole class of near-death experiences, all of them aren't the wonderful light, the love, like Eben got. Some of them are scary. Some of them are terrifying. Not many, a smaller amount, but some of them are like that. So you get all kinds, and some of them are kind of bland and don't have any kind of big wow behind them. But there's a very large minority that do have a big wow behind them, and they all are pretty much the same experience. They find themselves aware in some other reality, and they'll see a light or some sort of thing that kind of attracts them to move toward the light, and then they find that this light is immense, awesome, full of love and caring, and they forget who they are. Their own identity disappears, and they just merge with this thing, and they feel that they are connected to everything, all other consciousness, all other things, every blade of grass, every twig, everything. They're a part of it, and it's a part of them, and they have this oneness with not only this kind of being of light, but it's a oneness with everything. And they experience this, and it's so beautiful and peaceful, and it's it's an experience that's transformative. It's an experience that when you come back from that, you're not the same person. You're different after that, because this tells you what it could be like, what
Yeah.
that there is another reality, that there is more to reality than the physical. And it's not only more to it, but it is fundamental. It's significant. It's important. It's the real deal. And what we have here in this physical reality is just a subset for us to make choices in, to learn, to grow. So they get this, and if you've read Eben and you've read others, it's a similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
And often they're given an opportunity to come back or not, or sometimes they're just told, no, you got to go back, because mostly when you're in that state, you don't want to come back. This is much more pleasant than anything you've ever experienced before. And going back, it's like, no way. So typically they're told, it's not your time yet. You have to go back. And usually the person feels like, no, I don't want to go back. I want to stay here. But you go back anyway.
Yeah.
And what has happened is the source. There is a source. I say consciousness is fundamental. So I just call this consciousness, I call it the larger consciousness system, and that's just source. Is just consciousness. Consciousness is an information system. And that's not too hard to understand because, you're conscious, what you're conscious of is the data that you collect through your five senses.
Mm-hmm.
You shut off all those five senses, then you're not aware of anything. You're a point of consciousness floating in a black void. You don't see, hear, taste, smell, feel anything. Well, it's the Descartes moment. You're aware, and that's it. But there's nothing to be aware of. You have no sense data. So consciousness is really about information. So in any case, this larger consciousness system takes these people, gives them this data stream, gives them the experience of moving to the light and becoming one, which is basically an experience of what consciousness, what highly evolved consciousness is like. This is what it's like to be a fully evolved consciousness. So they get that experience, and then they get sent back. And often whatever was ailing them gets taken away. Over the next week or two, they go from going to die in any minute to being healthy. And that's because they're supposed to tell other people about it. They're supposed to spread that word. They're supposed to write books that go on programs like this and, talk about it so that people get an idea that this reality is bigger than just the physical. And there's a reason why the system is trying to make that idea, a more common idea, to spread that idea. And we can talk about that if you
Yeah,
want.
man, definitely. You got me all fired up over here. I'm like, I'm on my edge of my seat.
Well, for the first time in the history of humanity, we now have an opportunity to make major growth steps in evolution of our consciousness. We've always had people who had the bigger picture and understood consciousness. We have the Buddha almost 2,500 years ago who said this physical reality is an illusion, and what the point is to care. It's the compassion. It's love. It's about other. That's the key thing. This is just a place to make choices and to grow up in. This is a schoolhouse. Well, he said all that, and that's all true. That's exactly the way it is. And you've had, other, not just the Buddha, but most of the religions fundamentally come down to the purpose here is to care about other, turn the other cheek. God is love. It's a statement out of the New Testament, Christianity. Turn the other cheek, do unto others as you have done to yourself. It's all about being a good person, caring about other people. Well, those ideas are available to anybody who takes the time to explore them. In other words, the exploration of inner space is cheap. All it takes is time. You have to put the time in, to do it. But if you put the time in and you put it in over years, you'll find all these things out for yourself firsthand. That is the nature of reality. So the Buddha explored inner space and he figured it all out, and others have before him and others have now. It's not that hard to do because its only cost is time and persistence. Whereas, say, the exploration of outer space is really tough because that takes, a couple of $100 billion and a lot of very expensive equipment. That's not easy to do, but exploring inner space is easy. So we've always had these little bubbles of enlightenment popping up throughout the ages, but they've always stayed in the margins. They've never actually gone mainstream to where the mass of humanity says, oh yeah, right, that's why we're here, to become love, to care, about each other. That's never made it into the mainstream. Well, there's reasons for that. It's like it was generally isolated locally. Back in Buddha's time, just to go 20 miles from where you are is a big deal. You walk for a couple of days to do that. So things didn't spread. You didn't get worldwide humanity, getting an idea, because it just kind of worked its way around, went from place to place. But it's always on the outside of the power structure. So we had mainstream religion, but mostly in the West anyway, that was a big business. It was big money and a lot of real estate and, expenses. And, it was a power, and it was a lot of power and influence. So it was a different kind of thing. It wasn't, and you had lots of them, and they were all competing with each other. And, my way is the only way. You go my way, you go to heaven. If you go their way, you go to hell. And it was very competitive. So it wasn't mainstream. And then we had science. And when science came up and began to take over the kind of the belief, I say that the scientists now are the high priests of Western culture. But Western culture is all over the world. So really they're the high priests of humanity pretty much, because the high priests are the people that tell everybody else what to believe. And we believe the scientists. So if the scientists say this is the way it is, then everybody says that's the way it is, because the scientists don't tell lies. They do experiments, and that's the way it is. So we trust them and we believe them. 500 years ago, it was the high priests of religion who told people what to believe. So so now we have the high priests. Well, instead of having a bunch of kind of religious or ethical ideas bouncing around, but none of them actually capturing the mainstream humanity, now we can change that. We have an internet. Now we have 2/3 of the adult population, and probably quite a bit younger than the adult population added to that, is online, or knows people that are online. So now ideas spread quickly. Ideas can go wide. So that solves the idea of local geography. I mean, it gets over that problem. And now the high priests of Western culture are going to, in probably the next decade, say that this reality is definitely a virtual reality. They're going there because that's just better physics. That's what their experiments are telling them. That's what their quantum mechanics has been telling them now for about 100 years. And they have been trying to work around it and get around it, and they can't. And now it's coming from all sorts of other angles. You have biology. Bruce Lipton says consciousness is what's fundamental. You have neurophysics. What's the guy's name? It'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, he says that his neuroscience tells him that this physical reality is like a user interface, sort of like your computer screen. That it's not really the nuts and bolts. It's not the processors and the memory and all of that. It's the user interface, and that's what our reality is. So he shows that, and he has a mathematical model to back it up. So these ideas are coming now from all over. You have lots of people who are coming to the same conclusions, and the physicists are coming to that same conclusion. And they will, because it's better. You can solve a lot of these physics problems, these paradoxes in physics, once you see that this is a virtual reality, and once you see that consciousness is a computer. So ideas, big paradigm shifts take a long time to happen. They don't happen overnight. They take a long time. And this one's been bubbling on the sidelines. And I'd say that right now, probably 20, 30% of the physicists in the world think virtual reality is a pretty good idea. Whereas just 10, 15 years ago, it was probably 0.5%.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's still a minority, but it's growing, because that's the only way that you can explain experiments.
Yeah.
I remember looking at a group of physicists being interviewed back when they were looking at the Higgs boson. Remember the God article?
Yeah.
Physicists, they make up a lot of creative names for the press. But anyway, and this group was trying to explain to this reporter, and they said, well, look, you know, it used to be that people thought an electron was a little chunk of mass with a charge. And he said, but it isn't. It can't be, because if we model an electron as a chunk of mass with a charge, we can't get the right answers about what comes out of these atom smashers. He says we can get the right answers if we model an electron as a point with the attributes of mass and the attributes of charge. Well, that's how you model an electron with information. Attributes are just information. It's a point with attributes. That's a simulation. So physicists are going that way. They can't get right answers with little particles and chunks of mass. It doesn't work. Yeah. That's not the way the world really is. Mm-hmm. So in any case, scientists, particularly physicists, are getting to that point, and within another decade or less, I think they're going to say, yes, this reality is a virtual reality. That means it's a information-based reality. That's the way they will phrase it.
Well, can you change the variables for yourself? Like if you, like you say, virtual reality in a game, I can change some of the variables in it, right? Like, can I, if I'm not particularly in love with, I don't know, let's say what some of the mainstream problems are. Let's say job, I don't know, job mostly, relationships, location. Because of that virtual reality, can we manipulate it to produce what we want out of that game?
Yeah, there are ways we can manipulate it. We can't manipulate it, all the parts of it, but there's some pieces of it we can manipulate. Yes. I can tell you 3 ways in which we create our own reality. Mm-hmm. 3 separate ways. One, very obviously, is by our behavior. If our behavior is, let's say, nice and friendly, then people like us. If our behavior is we're a user of people, you know, how can I use that person? What's in it for me? Then people don't like us because we're not very nice. So that changes how people interact with us. So it affects our reality. So that's an obvious one. The next one is less obvious, but that is we get a data stream and we interpret it. Our reality is actually our interpretation of that data stream. Now, when we interpret that data, that interpretation is clouded by our past experience, you know, our knowledge base. How much do we know? How ignorant are we? How much fear do we have? What sort of beliefs do we have? So, I mean, that's also obvious in the sense that, you know, 5 people standing on the same street corner watching the same accident will issue 5 very different reports of that accident. Depends on what they noticed, what caught their attention, and beliefs that they had, prejudices that they already had, you know, about driving and about this and that. You know, let's say there's somebody there who just really has a hard attitude toward young drivers and feels young drivers just aren't safe. And if one of those drivers is young, that person is going to see that young driver as more likely the problem and the cause than it would be if they didn't have that belief. You see, so we take in data, we interpret it, and that becomes that interpretation is our reality to us. Everybody lives in their own reality. Now, there's things we can't change, which is the basic rule set, the physics, the chemistry, the biology. That's part of the rule set. And we can't just change the rule set like, oh, I'd like to be able to fly. You know, so I changed the rule set, now I can fly. Well, that doesn't work because the rule set's the rule set. And the same in your virtual reality. You know, if you're playing a character in a virtual reality and you'd suddenly like to be rich, you can't just say, oh, I like to have a whole lot of money in my bank, or I'd like to teleport someplace, because if the virtual reality rule set doesn't support that, then you can't do it. You're kind of locked into that. Okay, but another thing that is probably the least obvious is that your intention, and this is where we started with our conversation, your intention can modify future probability. Now, we have free will. The future is not deterministic. It depends on our choices, and we have free will to make choices, but there are probabilities. In other words, if there are 10 different things that I could do, I choose one of those to do, but each one of those has a certain probability. This one may have a probability of 0.2, the other one might be a 0.8, the other one might be a 0.999 because that's the one I pick almost all the time, and the other one might be 0.001 because that one I'd be unlikely. So that's all the possibilities, and I get to pick those. So there's a certain probability function of what will happen next. And that's true of, rocks rolling downhill and, the way the weather changes and so on. So it's a probabilistic simulation, not a deterministic simulation. The rule set at the bottom is mostly deterministic with some statistics and randomness involved in it. But how we interact and what we do is all at the probability level. That's why particles are probability. How we interact with this world is at the probability level. So in any case, we can modify those probabilities with our intent. That's what the placebo effect is. We change our intention. We're happy now. We got this wonderful pill. So we get better. We change the probabilities. People can use their intent to heal themselves and other people. And it works. It works better if the person who's ill also has a positive intent. But if you're good at healing others, even if they don't, you can still heal them. Although they will probably then find some other illness to create, because you're not going to overrun their free will. They have more power over themselves than you do. So that's ways that you can modify. So if back in the 1950s, there was a book called The Power of Positive Thinking, and indeed that is a power. That is, if you think positively, you will live in a more positive world. You will smile more. You will be happier. Your relationships will be better if you're a positive person. If you're a negative person, constantly full of self-pity, oh, woe is me, everything's terrible, everything happens to me, life isn't fair. One of those things, what did the blues song say? If it wasn't for bad luck, I wouldn't have no luck at all. That's, that kind of an attitude creates problems. All sorts of things go wrong. You have all these difficulties that you're dealing with all the time because that negative intention manifests negative stuff in your life. So positive intention manifests positive stuff in your life. So you can't just get what you want because that intention has to change probability. So you may change something from 1 in a million to 1 in 1,000, and you're still not likely to get it, even though you lowered that probability a whole lot. Good for you. You're a wizard. But you're not going to get it because it was too much to have to do. So you can't just do anything. And for a lot of things, there's other people pulling in the other way. Let's say, I don't want it to rain tomorrow because I'm planning a family picnic. But there's farmers out there who want it to rain tomorrow because they need it for their crops. So we got intentions to make it rain and intentions to not make it, to make it not rain. Well, all those intentions are, one's pushing, the other's pulling, and it'll do whatever all that amounts to. So and that'll be an influence on it. Again, it's just an influence. It changes probability. It doesn't mean that it's just the people's intention that is what makes it happen. It also comes with an inherent probability, of doing that. So all you're doing is changing probability. So if there is no rain anywhere, everything is dry and there's no moisture in the air for, 500 miles in every direction, expecting it to rain in an hour is a very low probability, you see. So that's much harder to do that than if it's, there's splotchy rain here and there and whatever, and it's not raining where you are. Well, now it's much easier to make it rain where you are, you see, because the probability isn't so high. So to change that probability. So that's how you can use your intent to modify physical reality. And the reason we have that ability is because any good schoolhouse needs to give its students feedback. And that's the big feedback mechanism, because that way we get to create our reality to a large extent. Okay, so it's not only how we interpret it that creates our reality, but also how positive or negative we are. That creates our reality. So if you look around outside today and you see, what's the world like? What are people like? Well, it's pretty ugly out there for the most part. There's a lot of self-centeredness, a lot of greed, a lot of nastiness, a lot of grabby actions going on, a lot of control, power, force, being used. Well, that's because that's the way we are. That is an accurate representation of the quality of consciousness of humanity. So that's the world we create. And when we individually let go of that fear and ego and beliefs, then we'll live in a nicer place.
Yeah.
Institutions, the politics, the economics will all change when we change. And if we don't change, none of that stuff's going to change. If we don't change, you can go out there and replace that dictator with a nice guy and replace that CEO with a nice guy. And in a short amount of time, it goes right back to the way it was.
Yeah.
That nice guy doesn't live forever. And it's just going to go back to the way it was. It's not, what did we have? We had the French Revolution. It was all about freedom. And what did the French Revolution do? Gave control to Napoleon.
Yeah.
They went from one dictator to another dictator.
Yeah.
You see? So that's typical, because the people that reflects the people. So that's kind of how the big picture works. And that's why the system is trying to help us see this bigger picture, because now we have an internet. Now these ideas can spread all over, not just a little group here and there. And now we're going to have the high priests say that this is a virtual reality, which then makes it credible and goes mainstream. Yeah. You see? So that's the problem. The high priests, back when they were religious, say 500, 600, 800 years ago, they didn't want to say things like that because they were in positions of power. It was about politics. It was about who could overwhelm who. It wasn't so much about spreading love and peace around the world as it was about how much wealth and power could you get. So we weren't ready yet. Yeah, but we've grown up a lot.
I think we're getting there, right? Like I think people are wanting that. I think
exactly.
I think we need that. I think I see a lot I see a lot of darkness, and I see social media drives that a little bit. And the message that I hear from you about the overall, like if you had one last message to mankind, it would be love each other as yourself, right? Is that what you learned from your out of body experiences? Was that the lesson that all through your travels? Like, was that the message that was always repeated?
Well, it's not that message was repeated, but eventually, this is an evolution game. When we evolve the quality of our consciousness is an evolving system. And as you evolve, as you get rid of the fear, as you get rid of the ego and get rid of beliefs, you should believe nothing. You should always be skeptical. And yes, including about what I say, you should always be skeptical. If it's not your own experience, then it's not your truth. You should always be skeptical. In any case, in that growth path, the more you unload the fear and the ego and the beliefs, the more you see that what's left is love, and that's the only thing that really works. If you have a social system, which we have, humans create a social system. Yes, a family, a country, the world, but it's a social system. And in a social system, you optimize what that social system can do through cooperation, through caring, through love. And if you apply fear and ego and beliefs, you tear it apart. You don't optimize it. You make it very suboptimal if you do that. So what I've been doing this now for probably 40 years or so. And over time, as you evolve, it just becomes obvious to you that the whole point, why we're here, is to grow up, is to evolve the quality of our consciousness. And in my model, my model is a very logical model, not just words. And in that, that can be said in terms of we're reducing the entropy of our consciousness. This is an information system. And information reduces the randomness. Information is a good thing. If you got an information system and all the bits are random, there's no information. That's high entropy. If you order those bits around to mean something, now you've just lowered entropy. You've created order where there was randomness, and the entropy's lower. Well, that's the way information systems evolve. That's the way consciousness as an information system evolves. And in a social system, the way you lower entropy is by caring about other people. It's about cooperating. And in order to evolve, you need a situation in which you have choices that have consequences, that have meaning. If you're all sitting around in a big chat room, there's no consequences. You can say anything to anybody at any time, and there's very few consequences to that. So you have a virtual reality like this one. Oh, there's life and death choices. There's lots of choices that have big consequences here. It's hard to find choices that don't have big consequences here. Everything affects other people and has consequences. So this virtual reality is here as a schoolhouse for us to make choices, and by those choices, evolve the quality of our consciousness. And the system, I call the larger conscious system, it's evolving. And it had to do the same thing we're doing. It had to figure it all out too. And it figured it out. And now that's why it gives people who have NDEs, near-death experiences, it gives them that little experience and sends them back to talk about it. That's part of the solution, because now, like I say, we have it all together. The last part is the high priests telling us that virtual reality is a mainstream idea, not a margin idea. Wow. And if we have enough people at that point who have a bigger picture and know that love and caring and cooperation is what life is about, that's our purpose here, to learn that. Well, when we realize that this is a virtual reality, that consciousness is the computer, all that will fall together. Consciousness is a social system. Caring is what makes it evolve. So it all kind of, it can all come together and we can take a big leap forward. Evolution goes like this. It starts out very low. I can get my hand up here on the camera, and it doesn't rise much. It just goes up a little. It just doesn't rise much. But then once it starts to learn, it can go up quickly. Yeah. That's the way evolution works. It's slow until things actually start to change. And when they do, wow, like a creature may be here for 100,000 years. And then when he starts going extinct, between that starting and becoming extinct, it's generally fast. Yeah. It just happens quickly. Evolution tends to have a curve like that. It accelerates toward whatever the pressures of its environment are pushing it. So here we are, 200,000 years we've been out of the trees walking around as Homo sapiens. In 200,000 years, our social system have been warlord mentality, control, power, force. And that stayed the same right up until what, 500 or 600 years ago? Yeah. Maybe 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years out of 200,000 is half of 1%. So it's just been in very recent history that the growth has started this climb. We're starting to see some growth. And that just gets faster and faster and faster. And like I say, another decade, this will be mainstream. It'll be a virtual reality. If people understand that this virtual reality is here to help them evolve, to become love, then there'll be a movement. It'll
Yeah.
go, it'll go quickly, and humanity will take a great step forward, and we will live in a kinder, gentler place, and all our institutions will begin to care about the people rather than care about their own power.
Sure. So when we reach that love, when we reach that evolution, and let's say we go on, our consciousness transfers to the next reality. Like, what happens next? What is what has been your experience? Like, what is it? Do we go? Do we come back again? Do we? Or when we hit that certain X number of times that we want to come back, where do we go next to evolve?
Okay. Your evolution is never done. Okay. What we're doing is reducing entropy. It takes effort to reduce entropy. The way entropy works, called second law of thermodynamics, if you just sit there and do nothing, put no energy into it, entropy increases. It's just the nature of reality. Entropy increases. Same with consciousness evolution. If you don't make an effort to grow up, if you don't make an effort to get rid of your fear and your ego and your beliefs, then nothing happens, or you sink deeper, you get worse, you de-evolve. Okay, so you can never get to zero entropy. You never get to the point where there's nothing else to do. You've grown as much as you can grow. You never get there. And if you did get there, so you just kind of folded your arms and says, oh, I'm done, that's when you'd start to de-evolve, because you're no longer putting effort into it. So you constantly have to be putting effort into it. So what you'll do is that as you evolve and get a higher quality consciousness, when you die, you're going to come back to be helpful to other people who are still struggling with that fear and ego, because we've our quality of consciousness in humanity in general is pretty low. It's not. We're not in. This is not graduate school. This is like daycare almost. This is elementary school. So if you do have some people who get up there and evolve, then they'll come back, because we need encouragement. We need good examples. We need people to explain the nature of reality and how it works. So that's what you'll do. And there's really no end in sight. You don't graduate and get done. It doesn't work like that. There's always somebody that needs help, somebody that could use encouragement, something, even if you're nothing more than a good example. That good example changes a lot of people. Think of the little old lady who lives on the corner street that stands out and, talks to all the children after school when they walk home and hands out cookies and things like that, and it's just nice. I mean, she doesn't give them money or anything that's really going to change their life, but she just smiles. She's nice. She's happy. She calls them by name. That makes a difference in somebody's life. That's, when you share positiveness, it helps everybody feel a little more positive. So even just being a good example is a wonderful thing to be. And we can always use more good examples. If we had a whole lot more of those, then we'd tend to act better. We'd be more positive. So there is no done. The system itself is still evolving. It's not done. It's not supernatural. It's not infinite. It's not perfect. It's an information system, and it's conscious. So it has lots of these individuated units of consciousness. They all have free will. They form a social system, and they have to learn how to cooperate and care and optimize, lower that entropy, because that's evolution, is lowering the entropy. So that's the thing. You don't get to an endpoint. You don't get done. If you have, you run into somebody that has this attitude, oh, I am fully evolved. I'm enlightened. I understand everything, and I'm getting out of here because this hellhole just sucks, and I'm out of here. This is my last incarnation. Well, does that sound to you somebody who really cares about other and wants to help, or does that sound somebody
Nah,
who's
it sounds like he's going to degress.
Right. It sounds like somebody who's trapped in his own ego and he's thinking about himself, and that is somebody who obviously is not that enlightened.
Yeah. Tom, man, I love hearing you talk. I just love your theories. I love your the information, the content that the value that you're giving my audience right now. Like it's so cool to be connected with you. A man who has done a lot of research in the quantum field. And it's funny, you were talking about science and the overlords or the high priests. It seems like through quantum physics, it's like I found more spirituality through this than I have through religion. It's crazy just thinking about all the theories. Just brought me closer, to experiencing that love, to making sure that I show others love, and that's where I hope to go. Like this podcast is my way of helping others grow, and then bringing people like yourself who have done great work in this world, scientific work that is kind of like, it has crossed the line a little bit, with I wouldn't say religion, but it's like science is helping show more love, where it's not just science is trying to prove data or support data. It's trying to help support your science is trying to help others bring more love into their life. And I think that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, well, what we're doing, what we need to do, and what I'm trying to do, and with my book, is that we look at, science, and then we look at metaphysics, religion, philosophy, and those two things seem to be almost opposed to each other. There's like this big wall down the middle of them that, science is generally very materialistic. So they deny everything that happens, that's not materialistic based.
Sure.
So they'll say remote viewing, can't happen.
Yeah.
They don't even have to look at it. They don't have to test it. They don't have to do anything because they know it is impossible because it's not materialistic, and that's their belief. So they're stuck in a belief trap. Well, scientists are human like all the rest of us, and they have beliefs too that limit them. So the idea is to bring all that together. Once you understand that consciousness is fundamental, then when you understand consciousness, you can see how everything else fits in. You can derive physics. You can solve all these physics problems. You can see how Bruce Lipton ends up with his attitude in epigenetics. It's the mind that affects genetics. You can see how all this stuff fits together. And basically, it's all one thing then. It's not science over here and philosophy and religion and metaphysics over there. It's all one thing. And you see that the objective world is just a subset of a larger world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of silly for scientists to say, well, we only, the objective world is the only world there is, when 75%, 80% of everything in our life that's really meaningful to us is subjective.
Yeah.
Who are you going to marry? How many kids do you have? What kind of job are you going to do? How do you treat other people? What sort of relationships do you have? All those things are all very subjective. And that's what's really important in your life. I heard somebody say that when you're on your deathbed, you don't regret that you didn't work more hours. Yeah. You regret that you didn't put more time, into your relationships. That's where your regret, if you're going to have any regret, that's where it's going to be. So it's in that subjective world is where most of the meaning and most of the significance is. And yet science won't touch anything in there. They walk away from that.
You can't replicate it. It's not falsifiable, or whatever they call it. You know what I mean? You can't prove them wrong. I don't know. It's just crazy. That's what I struggle with science. That's why I struggle with science too.
That's a problem. They have to see things in a bigger picture, and they force even what they call the soft sciences, the hard sciences. Well, those are the real sciences, that's physics and biology and chemistry. Yes. Well, they call the things like psychology and sociology and that stuff, they call it the soft sciences.
Yeah. We're the step kid, the redheaded step kid, psychology.
So they don't take psychology, sociology, all that serious either. But the thing is that, unfortunately, to be a science, you have to be objective. So then you take sociology and psychology, medicine, other things that really have mostly subjective. There's a lot of subjective things, and you throw out as much of the subjective stuff as possible and try to force it to be objective because that makes it science.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not real science. So now you have, psychologists, you have sociologists, doctors, you have all these people that are in soft sciences, and they ignore all of the stuff that is not number-based. If they can't count it, if they can't measure it, then it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
And that's too bad because they're missing a whole lot of things that would be very helpful to people, that just because they are forced to look at only the objective side of things because that makes them science. Yeah. And they want to be taken seriously, so you have to be science. So that's where the high priests are. They want to be at least, acolytes to the high priests. They're trying very hard to be as objective as possible. So you have this big push in the soft sciences to be objective. And that leaves a lot of real interesting problems lying on the floor.
Yeah.
You got parapsychology. All right, well, those guys have to be objective about something that is totally not objective.
Totally not objective. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, so that limits them into what they can say and what they can't say. And if they stand up at a meeting and say things like consciousness is fundamental and the rest, everything else is a subset of consciousness, well, their credibility will go down the tubes. Yeah. Everybody will X them off. Well, this guy's lost it. He's not rational anymore. Yeah. Well, that happens to be a fact, but it'll never be a fact in a world that only looks at objective things, because that's all subjective. But see, the objective part of reality is just a subset of the larger reality where the uncertainty is small. So that's, so the uncertainty is small. Like, you have that microphone in front of you, what's the volume in that microphone? How tall is it? What's its diameter? Well, none of those things can be said exactly because, it depends on how many decimal places you can measure. Can you measure that out to 20 decimal places? Probably not. Your equipment fails to be able to tell you what's in that 20th decimal place. So you have to guess out there. So none of it is entirely objective. It can't be defined objectively, but the uncertainty is very small. It's out in the 20th decimal place. So that's objective. The fact that we can't actually define it precisely, well, that's a problem only theoretically, but in the real world, we know what the objective world is. It's all the stuff that has small uncertainty. Yeah. The stuff that has large uncertainty is all the subjective stuff. There's lots of uncertainty. Should I take this job or that job? Ooh, lots of uncertainty. That's going to be a subjective decision. There's no way to objectively do that because there's not enough information. You see, so all the stuff that really matters to us is subjective. Yet we, in all our sciences, even our soft sciences, our social sciences, we won't look at things unless we can measure them. So they try, but they have to do the numbers. They have to do the math and they have to do the statistics, or they're not taken seriously.
Yeah. Well, I'll take you seriously, man. You're legit. I'd love having this conversation with you, and I hate to end it. We got to do this again sometime.
We've run over a little bit, haven't we?
No worries, man. Only for you, though. That's the only thing. Only for you. How can people reach out and connect with you?
Well, they can go to the website, which is www.mybigtoe.com. They can go to the people that organize all my events. That's where you find those binaural beats, and that's at mbtevents.com. If they want books, in case they can buy them at any place, usually buy books, bookstores and Amazon and so on. But if you don't want to buy them, they're free on Google Books. When I first published them in 2003, I put them out on Google Books and put the whole thing out there, and they've been free since the very beginning.
I know where I'm going tonight. Google Books.
So they don't cost a whole lot. At my website, I do all 3 books for like $25. So that's like $8 and change a
Good.
piece. So
That's awesome.
yeah. So I don't charge a whole lot for them, but in any case, you can find books. Now, where you want to go if you don't want to read these books, because these books are science, really, they are very logical.
Mhm.
If you have a logical mind, then they'll be your thing. If you, you know, if you do, logical process thinking, you'll love them. If you're not, if you're a right brain person that just does holistic thinking, you're going to struggle with these books because they're very logical. And in that case, go to YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel that has about 1,000 hours of video.
Really?
That's very intimidating. Some of them are short, but most of them are pretty long.
Mhm.
Every event I do, every talk I give, even every interview like this one, if I can get a hold of it, I put it up on YouTube.
I'll definitely
Everything that
send
I
it to you.
can. Yeah, send it to us. Send it to MBT Events, and they will have it. They'll have it up on my YouTube site, which is good for you too, because I've got like 50,000 subscribers, and your video
Yeah.
with your upfront data on it, telling you who you are and the name of your show, that gets 50,000 emails sent out for people to look at it. So
Yeah.
it's good for everybody. So I try to put everything out there, though some of my events are paid. You have to pay to go to them because there's venues and,
Sure.
food and other things. But I try to put them afterwards all out for free.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
I told you I teach courses about how to, remote view and do all these paranormal things. Well, go there and look for the event I did at TMI, the Monroe Institute, and you will have the whole thing right there. You can do the whole course for free.
That's awesome.
And if you buy those binaural beats for $25, then when I tell all those people to go listen to the binaural beats, you can go listen to the binaural beats too. And the only thing you're missing will be the ability to ask your own personal question.
Sure.
But most questions are pretty similar, for people learning these things. And if you just listen to the questions that are asked, they'll probably answer most of your questions.
Yeah, I know I'm on vacation just this week just to take some time off, and I know I'll be in the office for quite a bit, probably listening to those 1,000 hours of content. That rabbit hole you just opened up for me. Tom, this has really been an honor. Like, I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart for you coming on this show. Like, this is my passion. This is something that I'm very curious about, and for you taking the time. I know you're a very busy man. It really means a lot, and I say thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I'll say thank you right back to you, because my point is that when we physicists get to the point of declaring this a virtual reality, the more people who have the bigger picture, the more quickly we'll end up at a kinder, gentler place. So that's one of my missions is to not keep this to myself, but to let people see the bigger picture. Because if you understand that bigger picture, all of the things that have been your experiences will all suddenly make sense, and you'll know what to do next. You'll know if you're unhappy, or if you're struggling, or if you have trouble with relationships, all that stuff, you'll know what to do, and you'll know how to do it. It's the difference between wandering around in the playing field clueless of what the game is and actually understanding the game and knowing how to win it.
Sure.
Those are two really different things. So the more people who figure out what the game is, that it's about caring, it's about love, and so on, then that's good. And then I'm doing these experiments, which will go back up. They'll get published and be accepted by a physics journal, and that will start pushing a little harder on the scientists to look at it from this new viewpoint of virtual reality where consciousness is the computer. So I'm trying to work both angles, and that's why I come here and talk to everybody pretty much who wants to talk, is because that's how I can spread the word and let people know